CPI came out this morning, 0.5% monthly increase, which is in line with expectations, but it's kind of disappointing because we want inflation to come down more quickly. It brought the year-over-year number down by only 1/10 because we replaced the January of 22 number, which is 0.6, with the 0.5, so it came down 0.1. But part of that thing that's important to understand is they change the calculation every January. They re-weight how the CPI categories factor in. And this month, they actually took the shelter component, which we've been talking about a lot, and they increased it from 39% of the total number to 44%. So by increasing it by 5%, it increased the amount that the shelter cost is actually affecting the total CPI picture, which caused it to go from basically 0.4 to 0.5.
So the estimate was correct until they messed with the...
It was, which, what's interesting about it is the shelter component, so they're increasing the weight of this thing, but they're still using the wrong calculation. And it's like, when are we going to figure this out? Well, the good news is they don't really need to. So the CPI calculation, because of the fact that it's going back and doing a 12-month average, if you go back a year ago from today is when we had the highest monthly increase in rents. It was like 18%. So now we're averaging 18% from a year ago with 3.3% from last month. Last month, rent only went up 3.3%. But because we're using an average, the CPI factor is counting like 7.74%. So then you take it and you increase the weighting from 39 to 44, and all of a sudden it's exacerbating the issue. So all that to say that this number is disappointing in the short term. It's going to cause the Treasury to go up a bit. It's going to cause people to start talking about the Fed having to raise rates again and keep them high for longer, and we're going to have that sort of rhetoric. But at some point, I think in the next month or two, we're going to start to see that CPI shelter cost come down, and it's going to come down every single month for a while because it's a lagging indicator. I wish I had my graphics up here, but that Zori index that I showed you guys, it went up like this. It's what went up to 18%, and this was about January of 22. And now today it's at 3.3. Whereas the CPI shelter cost is doing this. It's at 7.74, I think it is. The reason why that's happening is that this is taking not only this year, but it's also, if somebody signed a lease right here, you're comparing it to a year prior to that. So it's actually a 2-year lag on this indicator. So it's kind of anyways, I don't want to dive too much into that, but the point is this is going to reverse course, and it's going to stay that way for a long time. And so what we're going to start seeing going into February, March, April, May, we're going to start seeing that shelter costs actually start bringing the total CPI number down, even if everything else stays flat. So they're not talking about that yet, but they will be. You'll hear about it in a couple months.
Are you hearing anything on just the multifamily unit building that's going on right now? Because they're scaling back on new home builds, but the multifamily apartment stuff seems like it's just going bonkers right now.
I haven't looked into that.
I haven't either. I'm just curious if you have, because they are building apartments at an alarming rate right now, and we're turning into an apartment nation.
I know that, is it Angela or Hurley we were talking?
It was Angela who's saying that the risk is
1,200 units or
totally deferred when they're building those things versus other things they could be building.
Well, and you start looking at the West Coast in particular when it comes to rents. The Seattle market in January, their rent costs dropped 1%, negative. So we're using a 7.74% positive figure, and part of it's because we're putting in more apartments and lower income housing, and people are moving out of Seattle. So, but if you look all down the West Coast, there's an article I can send you guys. The whole West Coast is actually at 0 or slightly negative on the rents. The middle part of the country is still elevated, and the East Coast is still elevated. So it'll take some time, but as we go through this, if you start having major metropolitan areas have negative rent growth, so depreciation in rents, that 7.74 number is going to go to 6 to 5 to 3 to 2, and all of a sudden the total CPI is going to drop, and they're going to be shocked by it. They're going to say, "This is crazy," because everybody's talking about this is going to last longer than we think, longer than we think, longer than we think. But if rent and shelter costs make up 44% of the total figure, and they are going to come down, it's empirical data. I'm not hypothesizing about this. It's happening. Then it's going to bring the total number down. So I think we're going to see the biggest jumps in improvements, the biggest drops in the shelter or in the CPI number in probably March, April, May. That's my guess. But I was listening to one economist today on Bloomberg, and he was actually talking, even though this is not the kind of report we want, we just had that jobs report that wasn't great, he still sees the total inflation picture being about 2.5% by June. Which seems like a huge improvement.
That would be enormous in a short amount of time.
It would be. I agree.
Well, that's
but
gonna
again,
happen.
if shelter goes from 7.74 between now and June down to 3.5,
That could be the.
that makes a big difference. So we'll see. There's a lot of variables, obviously. You know, the energy costs are a big one. That's what caused inflation to go up this month. Energy costs came up a bit.